Rodney and Deb, I am so excited to discuss this topic. I was just in Hutchinson, Kansas, visiting my 84-year-old mom. She lives on her own in a home there. She downsized from a home in Colorado in the beautiful but very remote mountains where she had lived with my dad before he died. And now she has easy access to grocery stores, drugstores, doctors, all those things. And she's even started visiting a senior living facility in town for just in case the time, if that time comes that she can't manage on her own. But I understand she's the exception. She's not the rule, that most Americans aren't really thinking ahead, aren't making these plans, and aren't ready to make those major life adjustments as they age.
That's right. Unfortunately, many of us have what's sometimes called the Peter Pan syndrome and don't think we're ever going to get old. It makes sense to think ahead and think about the options you might need to meet your future needs. One of our earlier panels talked about the number of people with disabilities in the country. Roughly a third of households will have one. But that means you may not. You may have difficulty getting upstairs at some point. You may stop driving at some point. And many times I've seen people go into a community, buy a home that's their dream home, and eventually becomes their nightmare because it limits them and limits their ability to do things once something shifts in their lives.
Now, Deb, I understand you're an architect who not only thinks about making homes accessible for people of all abilities and the aging, but you've written a book about it, really terrific book. And what I think is fascinating in here is that I see it goes so far beyond the grab bars and the gadgets that people often think about when they want to make a home accessible, and they end up making it look institutional. And these are not at all. Talk to us about designing with aging in mind. And I understand you have some pictures to show us.
Yes, I do. I wanted to add something to the previous point, which is that it takes a few years to implement a strategy. And so when people wait until they can't live on their own or don't feel safe or comfortable, that's a little late. So in my work, I really try to bring that conversation in much earlier, and I'm finding that people are actually initiating that conversation too. So things are starting to change. I've got a few images here from the book. So for example, this is how an accessible home doesn't look institutional. And this woman has everything within reach. The counter is lower. It's 29 inches for her. You can see a shallow drawer dishwasher so that she doesn't have to reach all the way down to the floor. The refrigerator opens in the right direction. The wall oven to the far right is at the height of the countertop, so she takes things out. She can put them down someplace nearby, and then she's got drawers down below. So all of her storage is within reach. People will look at this and they may say, is this something I can do in my house? Certainly. It's about smart rather than bigger. It's about compact and having the right appliances. Another image here. Here's a bathroom. You just see a little extra room around the toilet so that a person either can transfer from a wheelchair or have assistance to get up and down.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, you've got a sink with seated space, knee space open below. The tub is across from the sink. You can see the reflection in the mirror. So this is an accessible bathroom. The space for grab bars, even though they're not installed there, but it's built for later addition of them by putting blocking in the walls. Okay, here's a house that has both stairs and a ramp. And so...
But what a pretty ramp.
Lovely, lovely, yes.
I want that in my front yard.
This doesn't really broadcast that someone with disabilities lives there. It's, a delivery person bringing a dolly or a person with a carriage or a suitcase. So
stroller.
What works for people who are older also works for people who are younger. It's just a different way of thinking about the home. And
Rodney, you want to comment about any of this?
Absolutely. I think that's spot on, that these options we're talking about are fit for someone of any age, of any level of ability. It gives you the kinds of features you might need without looking institutional. That's really the thing, that nobody wants to live in an institution. So using concepts like universal design really help bring that out. And I love that these are pretty designs that also work for folks.
Yeah, and this is just simply think about how a person who's seated can take advantage of the view. So you have open railings system underneath the deck on the porch here. It's lower windows, not just more windows. You think about crank hardware rather than a double hung window. It's a different way of thinking for the building industry and for the design industry. Some of the things that we take for granted are really not accessible. We need to relearn or empathize with what it looks like, what it feels like to be living with a disability.
You know, Rodney, it's these images show us how Americans can increasingly age in place, but I think we're also talking now about aging in the right place and about livable communities. Explain to us what that means.
Right, there's many ways to think about a livable community. I think the simplest way is to think about options, that housing options, transportation options, the kinds of community features and services that your relative now has. Having those within range lets you choose the type of home or setting you want to be in. And that's the idea of a livable community, that you have your needs met. And so, you know, when we talk about the features in a home, the ones we've seen, for example, or making communities where people can walk and the like, you know, it's a change from many of the ways that we've thought about communities. I mean, for 4 centuries, we've been building communities in this country with the idea that there's not that many older adults among us.
And we're all driving everywhere.
We're all driving everywhere since the 50s. That's how we've been building things around the car. And you know, that's not the case for many of us. Men outlive their driving years by 7 and women by 10 on average. And so, you know, we're all going to get to that point where we need some of those options. And so the idea that we can start changing the way we do things, looking for the future, is the way that we can build communities that work for all of us.
Deb, I wonder if you could talk to us about how personal this process is. I know you mentioned a minute ago that your clients, you urge them really to think ahead because the process can take a long time from design, you know, concept to design to execution. But also, when you're designing these homes, you're literally designing it around a person's physiology, right? I mean, ideally, an accessible home should fit you like a well-tailored suit.
Yeah,
right?
I want to talk about the difference between accessible design and universal design. So accessibility has one definition from a zoning and legislative standpoint, which is about wheelchair users. When I was writing the book and in my work, I discovered that it's really, if you can't use the spaces that are there, then they're not accessible to you. So for people who are blind, for people who can't hear, people who have cognitive decline, what does it take to be inaccessible? What is an accessible bathroom for someone who's deaf? These are the kind of questions that I was asking, and all of my clients had these kinds of disabilities. So when we're working with an individual homeowner, we really can tailor the house to their needs. What is their reach range? You know, do they have long arms? Are they sitting high? Are they standing? Are they short? Are they tall? Are they heavy? How do they need to function? But I think universal design, which is many of the people here are involved in the multifamily housing space, is to anticipate the wide range that people have in abilities and to make sure that you create not only options for where you live, but options. Do you have standing or sitting when you're working at the kitchen? Do you have assistance or not? When you're in the bathroom, do you use a shower? Do you use a tub? I think the more we can create places that work for people with all abilities, the more universal we have our design. So you think about people who can't see and who can't hear, benefit from the same kinds of visual cues in the environment, the ability to have an open plan so you can see what's going on in the next room. You don't have to shout or walk to the next room and find out where people are.
Rodney, I understand that it's 90% of aging Americans, when you talk to them, that they want to stay in their homes, but that only 1% of homes are really conducive to that. And then we also know we're talking about a population that's often on a limited income. So could you describe to us some other alternatives that we might not be really familiar with, other options when it comes to senior housing that people might start thinking about being able to access in the future?
Sure, and you know, I always like to say people are amazingly adaptable and they'll figure out how to make situations work, but you're right, that we don't have the housing stock that matches our needs. There's certain things we can do within communities. We've been doing a lot of work on accessory dwelling units, bringing in your backyard or attached to your home another unit that might serve for you or for a caregiver, or really adapt your property to meet your needs. There's options of shared housing where people are actually moving in together, the Golden Girls model people like to talk about. But that's something that's growing in concept, and even varieties of it where co-housing units are being built where multiple people are coming together. These are some of the burgeoning models in addition to the assisted living facilities and
I love the
nursing
one
homes
of
that people are talking
seniors
about.
retiring on university campuses
Yes.
in dormitories. It sounds really fun.
And these are the kind of options, new and innovative options we need to find to take the housing infrastructure we have and make it work. That if what's really fulfilling me is my university affiliation and the ability to be on campus and maybe catch a game, that really
Go to a frat party?
go to why not? That might bring that social connection that I want, right? And that might be the most important thing to me. And having that option in my community lets me meet that.
Deb, let's talk a little bit about cost. When we look at these homes that you design, how affordable are they? And is there any kind of assistance to people who want to make their homes more accessible? Any kind of federal, state, local assistance? And if not, how can we, is that something that's in the works that people can be lobbying for?
Oh, good question. People usually have to dig into their own pockets and take out home equity loans, and really it's a struggle. I don't think there are the resources financially. I don't think there are the technical resources. People don't know where to start. They don't know who to call in. There's so many people in the various building industries, designers, builders, design builders. Who do they call? Where do they begin? So I think that this is an area for improvement. How does somebody even know what kind of funds or grants might be available? So for many of my projects, my clients have particular medically determined improvements to the home, and so if there are any accountants here, I'm not sure whether this is, you may have different thoughts on this, but if we can identify the medically necessary improvements and break out those costs, then at least they perhaps could be a deduction on their expenses. And I say to talk to your accountant about this.
How does it affect the value of the home then once you make it fully accessible?
If you make it accessible correctly, you make it in a way that's incorporated into the design and it's beautiful, then I think it's adding value, because you're not only making improvements, you're increasing the population that is interested in potentially buying that property.
But you never seem to see it on the MLS listings. It's not like you can search an accessible home, right?
You can't. You can find a two-car garage or a three-bedroom house, but you can't find a house that's accessible. There is a lot of room for improvement on the realty market, I think, for realtors to understand what it means to be accessible or universally designed.
Yeah, I'll just mention that there are a lot of things we can do to help this. I mean, some places are experimenting with rehabilitation tax credits that may help defer some of the costs. We can expedite permitting for homes that might be built with some of these features. We can do things to kind of help the market create these options that people need, because it is a change in the way of thinking for a lot of folks. And so we need to think about our future selves, not just our present selves. And so helping goose the market a little bit helps with that.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I recently read in the New York Times that something like 77% of the property in cities around the country are zoned for single family. So it's illegal to put in a multifamily or apartment building. And zoning has to change. There needs to be a groundswell of understanding that this is something that's going to serve our communities in the future and keep them healthy. We need to counteract the NIMBY, that attitude that comes up when someone wants to put in a multifamily housing development. So, I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
One of the other panels mentioned this 2 panels ago, the silver tsunami that's coming. I mean, what is it? 10,000 people hit 65
every day.
Every single day. And by the 2030s, people over 65 will be greater in number than those under 18 for the first time in American history. So how are we going to accommodate? I mean, if only 1% of homes are conducive to aging in place, how are we going to accommodate these numbers? I mean, do we have a senior housing crisis coming?
Well, I think we already have one. And I don't like to think about a silver tsunami in the sense that it's an impending crisis. We're all getting older, and we've got a crisis already, frankly, where we don't have enough of these options met. And so we've talked about a few pieces of it here, but the real answer is that we have to fundamentally rethink the way that we're building our homes and communities. It's going to take changes to our existing homes. We've talked about home modifications. There's over 100 million homes in this country already. We've got to make those fit our needs. We've got to start thinking about building new homes differently, adding some of these concepts of universal design and other types of features that might serve us better. We need to start building communities that give us options if we're not driving, and making sure we have housing that fits different types of people near the kinds of things they need. And that takes decisions from us as individuals as we're choosing things to demand these kind of things on the market. It takes changes in supply from those that are building and shaping communities. And it takes the public sector to start putting the policies in place that helps make these things happen, makes them easier to have, and in some cases maybe give incentives to do things the right way. I mean, we have to serve our future selves and not be as crisis-based as I think we are now.
Let me add to that. I think we need to have an education system, and certainly for people who are in the building trades, that they understand what universal design means. I see when I've talked to educational groups, I find that occupational therapists are on the front line of this, and they often don't talk to architects and vice versa. So more medical and architectural or design collaborations.
So really raising the awareness level.
Right,
across the
and then
board.
you see industrial design programs are very much on board with universal design, but not necessarily architecture and landscape architecture and city planning.
People get in their silos. We have to get across
Yeah.
the silos. As individuals, we're impacted by all of these professions, all of these people. We're living our lives in these ways. So all of these kind of pieces of our lives should go together. The transportation is not separate from housing. The way something's built is not different from the way that we're using it or the way we're interacting with people. All of those things come together for us in our lives. So all of our disciplines and all of our fields need to appreciate that and work for us.
Well, let's go to our audience for questions. And if you would just identify yourself and then move forward. We have a question right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Brianna from Leading Age. I have a question about housing modification. Some states have grants for that. Do you see that expanding for universal design in the future?
It's a great question, and it's encouraging that it is happening in some places, and I think so. I mean, I think as we've talked about the aging of the population, we're seeing more and more legislators and others understanding that their populations are growing and they're not doing enough. And so as we go around the country and talk to folks, we're starting to hear more and more questions about what we can do. And so that's one of the options in the toolbox. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's popular now, but I think in the coming years it will be, and hopefully it will be.
And I think these options, when they exist, need to be more widely publicized and recognized.
Yeah.
All right, more questions. One here.
Oh, sorry. This is Margaret
ahead.
Pothig from HUD. I have, on the home modification piece, I mean, I've been going around to different programs in the country who are, that are implementing home modification programs. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned is the prevention of falls and the cost to our medical system of that prevention. Would anybody like to speak to that?
Great
For example, we visited Capable just earlier this week out of Baltimore.
That's right. I think universal design seeks to avoid injury rather than just to mitigate injury once it's occurred.
Yeah, and the falls prevention is a huge thing. I mean, falls change your life. That it can often, especially as you're older, lead to a series of events that are health challenges and lead not only to expensive things on the health side, but limiting your ability to get around and use your home and the like. And this gets to something I just mentioned briefly earlier, which is that we often currently make crisis-based decisions. We wait for the fall to happen. Then we say, oh, I need to make some accessible design changes and shift things. Well, how about we, in the first place, avoid the falls, right?
What are some of the preventive measures design-wise, Deborah? And we can look at?
Non-slip surfaces on floors. I think many flooring tiles are not chosen with the basis of their coefficient of friction as a factor. Good lighting so that the pathway is clear. That could be step lighting. It can be just being attentive to how stairs and exteriors is in the whole path of travel within the house There are a lot of nice little fixtures that tuck into the wall that just light up the walking surface. Safety in the bathroom. Bathrooms are a source of most accidents in the home. So how do we make a bathroom safer? It's all hard materials.
Is that where most falls occur?
Yes, yes. 6% of visits to the emergency room related to accidents at the home are falls in the bathroom. So when you think about all the other things that can happen with fires and sleeping and tripping on wire, I mean, that's a fall. So outlets where you need them, often having them high enough up so that people can reach them rather than always down at the floor. The reason the outlets are where they are is because in the old days, that's where the height of a hammer. So they would always know where to look.
That would also benefit is flood-prone areas. I do a lot of disaster work, and if you only had your outlets higher, if you've ever been through a flood, when the water goes over the outlets,
and I think
your
also
electrical system is toast.
A lot of
higher, be safer.
built in so that you don't have surface portable furniture that's kind of in the way that somebody can trip over. That's also good for people who are blind or have visual impairments. They know where to find things. It's always there. Yes.
But one thing about the bathrooms and kitchens and even the outlets, when you're doing a remodel of those spaces, and people love to have pretty bathrooms and love to get those fancy granite countertops, well, why not think about having an open design that you can get around, adding some of these changes we're talking about that allow you to use that space if you did have something to happen in the future. No matter what your age is, you should be thinking ahead.
Rodney, Deb, thank you so much. Really great discussion.
Thank you.
Wonderful.